Good morning.
What do we got?
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, guys.
All right, today we're going to be talking about exercise versus nutrition.
Exercise versus nutrition.
Yeah,
The ultimate face-off.
the ultimate face-off. Even though they're both very much important.
Yeah. See, the for the sake of this podcast, like it is strictly a debate for fun. Now, when we're debating like what is more healthy, we are not saying you should choose one or the other.
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to improve your health, you want to harvest every lifestyle intervention you can. So you want to focus on your diet and you want to be active. So after this debate, whatever side you choose to pick, because we are going to pick a winner. And we'll let you know the winner right away, and I'll tell you why. But there is going to be a winner. But with that winner, we're not saying that the loser is something that you shouldn't focus on. Again, we're not trying to tell you not to choose one or the other. You're always going to be healthier if you do both.
Yeah, this is a health and wellness podcast, so
It's just a fun debate because,
just directing people to
yeah.
figure out their shit.
Well, and it's just a fun way to talk about the science. Because I think a lot of people like to get into this debate as if there's this like right or wrong approach to health. And there's this like 80-20 thing with nutrition. Like, oh, all your health goals are 80% nutrition, 20% exercise and stuff. And
Yeah, I've seen that a little bit.
That's how I rolled
Yeah.
when I worked as a fitness professional. Like, it was 80-20. It was always like the people that saw success is they honed in on their...
80% nutrition, 20%.
Yeah, because, you're
exercise.
only in the gym for a limited amount of time. Like, I'd see some people
Right.
2 to 3 times a week, but they're not honing in on their nutrition plan. They wouldn't see their goals. And I would always tell it to people when they stepped on the scale. I'm like, what are you doing outside of this? Are you eating healthy? Are you being active? And it's just like the ones that weren't didn't see the results. So it's really, I really believe that because the people that did hone in saw the best results.
I mean, I feel like I'm a perfect example of why nutrition is more important than working out.
so you guys are talking about weight loss here, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, you're talking about weight loss. Like Reed, you said
And
when
feeling
you hop
overall
on the
healthy
scale.
Too. Yeah.
So-
that too.
I will 100% agree that the approach, if you can reduce calorie intake, you're going to hit a weight loss goal quicker. But weight loss is absolutely not a good goal to have
We've
because it
talked
tells
about
you
that.
nothing
Yeah.
about your health.
You're
And that's the
only
thing. Like
looking at a number
everyone
that-
comes and is like comes to see you as a personal trainer or has the goal of just wanting to lose weight. We've obsessed over this weight loss.
rather than being healthier.
Right. There's some really interesting research on weight loss and how there's this trend of when weight loss diets started, and you can plot out weight loss dieting and how often people were doing this, and it looks exactly like the obesity epidemic. Because people go on these restricted weight loss diets and it's so bad for their health. They get into yo-yo dieting, they gain all that weight back and then spiral into this obese phenotype. And nutrition is going to be more important to achieve weight loss, but that is not healthy. If you want to lose weight, sure, you can do nutrition. You could also smoke cigarettes like we talked about in another podcast. Like if you want to lose weight really quickly, just start smoking cigarettes.
I'm doing
Obviously,
That's
again,
my next-
for the listeners, I'm not telling you to smoke cigarettes.
So let's just go over like what is health from a standpoint from a medical professional like yourself. Can you just explain that to the audience?
Yeah, so like when we're talking about health here, we're talking about like being free from disease, but not only that, when we're talking health, we're also talking about longevity and health span. So as you age, being free from disease, living longer, not just living longer, but living healthier. So there's a difference between health span and lifespan. Lifespan is how long you live. Health span is while you're living, are you able to do the things that you want to do? Are you free from disease? Are you free from these things that hinder you from daily living, quality of life, and so on? And So from like a disease standpoint and what contributes so highly to mortality, which is
What kind of
death.
disease are we talking? Like preventable diseases, like what?
Yeah, so when when I'm saying free from disease, we're talking about chronic diseases that tend to contribute mostly to poor health and mortality. And mortality is being just death caused by one of these diseases. And the leading cause of death is heart disease. With heart disease, we think of coronary artery disease. So people that get heart attacks, myocardial infarctions, what happens there is these vessels that actually deliver blood and oxygen to your heart so that your heart can beat. You think of your heart's a muscle that is constantly working
Yeah.
all day long. It needs so much energy. Its job is to deliver nutrients and oxygen to the rest of the body, but it needs its own oxygen and nutrients, right? So there's these vessels that as soon as the heart pumps blood outside of itself, those vessels circle back and just put oxygen and nutrients back into the heart so it can keep pumping. Coronary artery disease, so those are called coronary arteries. Coronary artery disease is when those blood vessels become occluded and there's this accumulation of fat that happens. So this is where cholesterol becomes such a problem. People are so focused on their cholesterol because when you damage the walls of these arteries, what happens is these LDL cholesterol molecules can make their way inside, become oxidized, release all these inflammatory markers, and start to just damage that blood vessel wall. And it becomes thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and constricts. And it's almost like you think of trying to pump water through a garden hose versus a straw. So as that gets more constricted, that's less blood, less oxygen you can deliver to the heart. And so the heart's not able to pump as efficiently. Hence, that leads to heart disease and a heart attack. Another tangent, sorry. That's just one. That's the leading cause of disease. There's other contributors, though. There's kind of these four main contributors to poor health and mortality. One being heart disease, so cardiovascular disease. Another being cancer and Alzheimer's or dementia-related conditions, and then metabolic diseases. Metabolic diseases, I'm kind of encompassing obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, diabetes, and those. But those four things right there are what contributes to poor health for most people.
So where does nutrition play a part in that?
So nutrition, and what we talk about in some of the other podcasts, is this issue with overconsumption. You know, when you're taking in nutrients, your body has to try to break those nutrients down, send them where they need to go. And this is the process of metabolism. If you have good metabolic function, what that means is your body's able to take the nutrients in, break them down, send them where they need to go. Poor metabolic function means it's not able to do that. It's not able to deliver nutrients where they need to go. Then they start to accumulate in these areas that they're not supposed to be, and they damage those organs. One really, really, really horrible place for nutrient accumulation is the liver. And so there's this disease epidemic that's been happening for the last few decades, where we're starting to see a lot of this fatty liver disease that we used to only see with people who are chronic alcoholics. And so there's this alcoholic fatty liver disease that you may have heard of, where alcohol, it disrupts so many of these metabolic pathways that impair the liver's ability to go through all these metabolic processes. And in turn, all this fat starts to accumulate in the liver. It impairs liver function, which the liver communicates with the rest of the body. So that impairs just overall physiological health and function. And then over the years, you know, physicians are starting to see like, oh, these patients that don't even drink alcohol are starting to resemble these chronic alcoholics. And it's because they are having these, and they had fatty liver as well. It was kind of this mystery of like, how is this happening? And it all came back to this accumulation of fat in the liver due to excess nutrients. A lot of that is excess glucose, but also excess fatty acids. And so when you have when you overconsume, all those nutrients get sent to the liver, and the liver's just trying to keep up with the rest of the body. And so if you have a lot of glucose circulating, your body wants to try to maintain what's called glucose homeostasis. It only wants a certain amount of glucose circulating in the body at one time. Bless you. And when those glucose levels increase, that gets shuttled to the liver, and then it's going to convert it into fatty acids, and that's going to accumulate, disrupt the liver. And so that's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now, diet specifically, this is a really long way to answer your question, Joe. I'm like,
I was like,
yeah.
well, so this kind of just brings me to that thought of you can't out exercise an over consuming diet. A bad diet, overconsumption, combine them both. You can't
That's where I'm at too.
out exercise a bad diet. You can't.
So-
There's no way.
Because
Yeah.
I like to think of it as a
Or
NASCAR.
can you?
No
'Cause,
way.
like,
Sure.
that's
Okay.
a
Well, but
NASCAR.
listen. Well,
Sorry.
yeah.
What
Keep
were
going.
you saying?
Think of it
Reed?
like a NASCAR or like Formula One car. Like you feed that thing sludge, that thing's not gonna run as well. Like you can have the best workout plan in your life, but if you're feeding that thing just crap, it's not gonna run. And I just that's how I always look at it. Is like nutrition is key.
Not only that, but if you're eating the standard American diet, which is shit, right? You're not getting the proper nutrients. You're getting all that saturated trans and shitty fats,
Sugars.
sugars.
Yeah, remember that number one food
Overconsumption.
group that
Yeah,
Harvard
what was, like,
study is
cookies?
grain-based pastries is
Yeah.
the highest food group.
Convince me otherwise.
Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah,
going to convince you that
Very
like
much nutrition
So,
train here.
you can outrun a bad diet. So
I guess I'm still stuck on that though, losing weight. But if you're eating the standard American diet, that's also unhealthy. So,
Mhm.
and I just don't. I don't know. I don't know.
So yeah, well,
From
let
there.
me let
No.
me.
right there with you.
you're done.
You gonna learn today.
Shut it down.
So no. So let me tell you why you're wrong. Now, so I talk about this NAFLD, right? Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That ends up leading to insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes, which leads to obesity, which leads to cardiovascular disease, cancer, even Alzheimer's is related to insulin resistance. So that's just kind of the starting point of this overconsumption, right? And so I understand your thought process now where you're thinking, okay, so overconsumption, like how the hell can exercise fix all those spiraling out of control? This would take probably 40 different podcast episodes where I would dive into each system and what specifically happens to each system with exercise specifically. We're not going to do that all in this podcast, but I will bring up quite a few. Now, just exercising one single time, one bout of exercise. If you went and exercised, and then I measured all these physiological parameters afterwards, I would see there's an increase in glucose disposal to the muscle cell. And so the muscle actually takes up 75% of that glucose. I talk about the liver and having glucose accumulation. Muscle is way better than the liver at housing that glucose. It can take care of that glucose way better. And so you've got this glucose that's going to be redirected. You also increase all of these enzymes that are related to breaking down those tissues, breaking down that fat, releasing that fat, helping the liver take up that glucose, convert it, spit it out, increasing mitochondria. So literally it will increase these powerhouses of the cell. One bout of exercise will signal to increase mitochondria. So metabolic rate's going to go up. The ability to deal with this excess calorie. Also,
But, okay.
muscle. Actually, you probably should interrupt me because I'll just keep going.
Yeah, well, now I fucking lost it. Shit. Okay, so what about? So you say one bout of exercise.
Yep.
Now, but when we were talking protein, right? I think it was protein. You said that to be anabolic, depending on how much you work out, you will be more anabolic afterwards, right?
Yep.
But one bout of exercise, since you're not well trained, you're not gonna be as anabolic as the other person who's well trained.
Yeah.
So
So how cool is that? That not only is one bout of exercise causing these, but if you do it over and over and over and over
but
again,
wouldn't you go
it
back
becomes better, more efficient.
wouldn't you go back to just baseline, like your baseline after that workout, like done? You're gonna go back to what it was, like way quicker.
No, these like some of these metrics when you look at, especially like inflammatory markers, because at the base of a lot of these diseases is this increased inflammatory process throughout the body. So inflammation going up. And with exercise, again, just one bout, you see a reduction in these inflammatory markers. Like,
Is one bout like you got? What's the number of one?
so
bout?
I
Are you
can't put a
saying-
number on one bout because it's studied in so many different ways. So these labs will
Okay,
look
give
at
like an average amount of time you're gonna be. That one bout would be. Is there an average?
I could have you hop on a treadmill for 15 minutes.
That's
and
it?
and we would see these results. Yeah. There's studies that is just like, yeah, testing just an aerobic exercise bout or having somebody go through like a VO2 max test, which takes like 8 to 14 minutes on
the
average. So yeah, I just did one actually.
It's the worst.
But so when I talk about exercise or when we talk about diet and all these things that spiral out of control, just metabolically, like the role that exercise has in improving all those aspects, when you contract your muscle can take in glucose without insulin even being present. It is called insulin independent glucose disposal. So type 2 diabetes is such a problem because muscle, liver, fat, they don't respond to insulin. So glucose levels increase like crazy. Now tell me any single diet that can cause glucose to get disposed without having insulin present. Exercise is able
Carnivore.
to do that. Other than apparently the carnivore diet
Hey.
is able to cure everything,
Well, you know,
which isn't true. So with nutrition then, we have all these metabolic conditions, and there's a problem right now with obesity, right? Obesity has become a pandemic at this point. Obesity rates are off the charts. All these processes that I was just talking about contribute to obesity, and then obesity contributes to the other diseases. It's the snowball effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about it from a clinical standpoint, people's approach to treating obesity has been weight loss. For just no reason. I mean, these GLP-1 agonists, these weight loss medications that have come out, the primary endpoint that they study in these clinical trials, so if you look at
Isn't
semaglutide
body
and
composition.
tirzepatide,
It's just weight loss.
it's just weight loss, yeah. And so the SURPASS, STEP, and SURMOUNT clinical trials, go ahead and look those up and you'll see the outcomes that they measured. It's just related to weight loss in these people. But it's so dumb. That tells you nothing about the health. And this isn't just those medications. This is what's done in a clinical setting. You get somebody that's obese and then you try to get them on a weight loss program. Well, there's really interesting research about how weight loss diets are actually worse for your health. When you take somebody who's obese and they go on a weight loss diet, they are not healthier. In fact, there's this really interesting phenotype of obesity, which is basically this population of people that have obesity that are actually metabolically healthy or their cardiorespiratory fitness levels are high. They are fit, but they are fat. So you probably heard this fit but fat, like people with a high BMI, people that have
Skinny fat.
Skinny fat is different. So skinny fat, you're actually not fit. And you have fat accumulation, but you're not fit. People that are fat, so they're obese, but they are fit. They have high fitness levels. They represent this population that actually does not get any healthier when you lose weight, and they do not need to go on medications or anything. There is this whole population.
You could look at like NFL athletes. A lot of those linemen, they are
Packing it, dude.
They're-
And then when they retire, they like lose it all, like Joe Thomas.
and they're just.
Yeah,
I mean,
they would be classified as obese. And I'm not talking just obesity. There are people that are prescribed a weight loss diet when they have diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And there's a review in 2018 that looked at all the research on weight loss diets for cardiovascular disease and diabetes related mortality. And they found that it actually increased mortality risk when these individuals went on these weight loss diets. And a lot of it comes back to these restricted diets. Not only what they're doing to muscle, so you lose muscle, you're less metabolically healthy. We're trying to improve metabolic health here, so
Are
it's
they
doing the
just
opposite.
doing diets and not exercise?
So in these particular papers, yep, they're just doing
Okay.
exercise. We'll talk about the ones that are doing exercise and diet, but in these papers, in these weight loss studies, and I'll link to a bunch of them because there's a few reviews dating back to the oldest one I have here is 2009 with obese patients, and they look at obese. If you're that healthy phenotype, you actually are increasing your risk by going on these weight loss diets.
No, can you just give an example of the weight loss diet? Like what are they eating? Or calorie wise, what's their calorie intake? What's their protein intake? Is that all in there or no?
So no, these systematic reviews are just including interventions where their aim is to have people lose weight. And these are done across a bunch of different institutions. And so a dietary intervention can look very differently. And you bring up a good point of like, you know, how controlled are these? You know, what if one study was not meeting protein intake? How would that influence these outcomes?
Right.
And that's a very valid point to bring up. But you do still see a weight loss approach that's used in a clinical setting is not healthy. And whether or not it's related to protein intake, which I assume is what you're getting at,
well,
is
not just protein. I'm just saying, like, overall, what is their calorie consumption for the day? It's probably what is it normally? Like a 15% decrease.
so in the calorie study, that 2-year clinical trial, they tried to put people on 25% reduction,
Okay.
found that around 11% calorie restriction was the easiest to adhere to for a couple years. So
Okay, so then that was kind of their aim for the weight loss diet.
weight loss diets typically are more, but again, this is a systematic review, so it's a bunch of different studies. So there's quite a wide range. But
Okay.
but essentially, the underlying thing is they are trying to have these patients lose weight as if it's going to improve these health metrics. And my point is, it's not. And so then when you look at where do we want to go next with this?
Timberwolves killing it on the basketball court.
Hopefully they still are by the
Dude, are
time
you
this
kidding me?
podcast is released.
They
Yeah, Anthony Edwards, dude.
Let's go.
game
man.
one. Game one was rowdy.
22 years old, best two-way player in the
He
NBA.
looks like Michael Jordan too. Have you seen the
The
side by side
yeah.
of Michael Jordan and Anthony Edwards?
When he dunked over
Spitting
KD, it
image.
was like,
No, I'm talking like they did a half and half
oh,
face.
yeah.
Perfect resemblance. Anyway,
He's on our
It's a
team.
dynasty.
He's on our team.
So there's a cool study of, it's literally about this, like, can you outrun a bad diet? And it's looking at a healthy individual or healthy group of individuals. So there was 15 college age kids, and they were healthy. And in the study, they had them do high intensity interval training for a span of 2 weeks. And they had them eat all 3 of their meals as just value meals at a fast food chain for 2 straight weeks. Like, imagine breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Plus they had snacks in
it
between.
would be pretty good.
Straight up fast food. And like, yeah, like, but
That's like a college kid's dream. Like,
Right.
Wait, what?
wait, I'm
Taco
gonna
Bell?
get free. Yeah, exactly.
Telling me I can go and get whatever I want. Yeah.
So
Every
when
meal.
you look at what happened with these individuals, I mean, 2 weeks on fast food, that is gonna mess you up, right? But they decreased body fat, increased lean mass, decreased circulating glucose levels, insulin response was increased. All these metabolic markers still improved with exercise, even though all they were eating was straight up fast
And
food value meals.
How many days a week they were
This was
working
2
out?
weeks. I gotta pull up the paper.
It was like,
Did they test their ball movements after eating Taco Bell for 2 weeks? I'd be interested to see that.
Yeah,
like,
right.
whoa, like gut health.
well, there's
like,
a lot of fiber in Taco Bell, isn't there? All the beans.
beans
Just got to make sure you get a beefy 5-layer burrito.
every time. Yeah.
Put a lot of hot sauce on that. I haven't had Taco Bell in a hot minute.
It's too expensive now. That used to be my go-to.
Is it?
Yeah.
Dang.
Try it, dude. Like the same stuff I used to get was like $20. Now I'm like, oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Used to be like 10
I mean, like
with a Baja
4
Blast.
years ago, I was spending $70 there. That was yeah,
don't go back, man.
No, you can't go
I'm gonna
back.
have to take out a
after that.
loan. Just like
That one hurt. That one hurt me.
Oh, here it is. Okay, so they were doing just a hit interval 14 consecutive days. So they were exercising every day, but they were just doing 15 60-second sprint intervals on a treadmill. That's all they were doing.
15 60-second sprints.
Yep. So they would sprint. So it's 15 minutes of high intensity
So they're
work.
probably on the
Yeah.
treadmill for 30 minutes, minute on, minute off.
And it's probably more than a minute off.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of times when you do these super high, like supra max, well, they were at 90% of VO2 max, actually, or 90% max heart rate.
Man, I gotta start doing that.
Some hit. Yeah. And then you can outrun your bad diet. How this relates. So there's a group of meta-analyses, and there's actually one review that was published a few months ago with looking at physical activity levels and diet and what that does to all-cause mortality. And all-cause mortality is like, what is the cause of death or something that causes death that's not accidental, so not like a car accident or a fall or something. And they found that regardless of diet, physical activity reduced all-cause mortality. So in the groups that had a shitty diet but were very active, they still had this reduced risk of death versus somebody who had a good diet but was inactive. They had an increased risk of mortality. So you compare these two groups, and this is consistent with another study with over 50,000 participants. This was done over in Iran, actually, with individuals that were over 40 years old, and they looked at the same exact thing. So they took them, screened for activity level and diet, and then followed them for on average of 14 years and looked at what does this do to mortality risk. And they found the same thing. If you're active, it doesn't matter what your diet is, your mortality risk is decreased. Whereas the opposite is true for if you have a healthy diet, but you are sedentary, you're still at increased risk. And so this outrunning a bad diet, turns out you actually can outrun a bad diet. Now,
Literally, I'll run a bit.
Yeah.
A little a donut hanging in front of you and run after it.
I don't know what this like.
Running after it, but also running from it.
There's a funny. I gotta stop looking down when you're talking because then I never even understand what you're
you know
saying.
what?
we're on the same page
You're
here.
gonna be
Yeah, no, I'm
you're
on
gonna
camera.
be called out on this one.
Because now it's clear that I'm not even listening.
Yeah,
Well, I just got to make sure that I'm bringing up all the research that I
either
want
you
to.
or me. I have to cut away from him because he's like, it's like he doesn't even give a shit. You know, you guys don't know what you're talking about.
Shut up. All right. So this like obsession with diet and ignoring the exercise is pretty popular within the media. So there's a New York Times article that came out in 2022. I was just looking up like what is the opposite argument? Like what are people saying when they say nutrition is better for your health? And there's a New York Times article that's titled, "You Won't Live Longer by Diet or Exercise Alone, Study Says." And then you click on it, it says, "Sprawling new research showed that healthy eating and regular workouts do not, in isolation, stave off health issues. They need to be done together." Which, disclaimer, they do need to be done together to get the greatest health outcomes. If you have a healthy diet and you're active, and I should backtrack, these studies that I just brought up, the one in Iran and the one from a few months ago, they did show if you had a healthy diet and you were active, you have a much lower risk of mortality than if you're active and have a shitty diet. So like diet plays a role, obviously.
Yeah.
It's just exercise plays a larger role. But so I clicked on this because I was like, oh, I haven't seen this study. Like, what study are they talking about? A lot of times in these New York Times articles, it's impossible to actually find a link to the actual study, but they did provide one. Good for them. And I am aware of this study that was published. And what they did do, so this is a cohort study that was done down in Australia. Yeah, Mike.
Come on.
And
Every Every time
Yeah.
not Australia.
Every time you say the word Australia,
Hey,
someone's going to
Australia,
do
you gotta
an accent.
you gotta go down under.
Yeah, this one was down from down under.
I feel like we'd be a lot more popular if we were all Australian.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Just the accents alone.
Yeah. Ooh, sounds good. Yeah.
We should have someone, Ben Tickle,
Yes.
have him come on and just talk. So
Talk
anyway,
about whatever
this
you want.
this
Koala bears.
this Australian study, they compared moderate and vigorous activities in comparison with diet interventions, and then when they were in combination, and looked at what does it do to cardiovascular and cancer related mortality. And the New York Times article said that there wasn't an effect when you look at these individuals, but that's only true for diet. They did find in this study that New York Times had no clue what they were talking about. They did find that both moderate and vigorous activity reduced the mortality risk associated with cardiovascular disease and cancer. And they found that the nutrition, so just diet alone, had that trend I was talking about before where like it trended towards a reduction in mortality, but there was no significance there.
The trend is not actually significant.
It's not significant. It just means that there was a difference there that they observed in the data.
You could say that it was
You can't say it was different. Yeah, you can say it was trending. So they say, although not reaching statistical significance for all-cause and cardiovascular mortality, being in the best dietary category was associated with a reduction in cancer mortality. And so like it was associated with a reduction or there was a trend towards a decline. There was no significance. There was no difference. And so there was a difference with exercise. So New York Times, you need to find a new editor for that journal. Because that's not what they found. So there's comparison studies that exist. The ones I just went over where you got people that are a good diet, low activity, or high activity, bad diet. There's these side-by-side comparisons, but there's not a ton of them. What there is a lot of is when you look at healthy diet approaches and what that does to longevity, and then you look at exercise specifically, what it does to longevity. So if you look at the recent studies and the meta-analyses of just like healthy eating, so there's all these different surveys that will look at health index scores for somebody's diet. And they'll see, based on the research, we know certain foods like fiber and protein, fruits and vegetables, and all these different foods that contribute to good health outcomes. If you look at a population level, people that are consuming healthier diets, what does that do to their risk of disease? And there's a significant improvement in just diet alone. So a couple of recent studies, one with 75,000 participants, found that when you compare a poor diet to a healthy diet, the mortality risk of people who eat healthy is up to from 14 to 19% reduction. That's pretty good. I mean, you've got a decent reduction in mortality risk there. Another one in 2023, this was with 245,000 participants from 80 different countries. This was out of the European Heart Journal. They found that when they compared a healthy diet to an unhealthy diet, the healthy diet caused a 30% reduction in all-cause mortality, an 18% reduction in cardiovascular disease mortality, 14% reduction in heart attack, and a 19% reduction in stroke. So healthy diet, I mean, it's pretty clear. And this is consistent across the research.
Okay, so
you do find these reductions.
When you're talking healthy diet, there he goes looking down again. Did they didn't have a regulated healthy diet? They're just saying a healthy diet.
So this European one that the 245,000 participants, they actually took it from a separate study called the Nurses' Health Initiative, where this European study that was one of the largest studies that's ever been done, where they looked at people's, they surveyed people's dietary intakes, activity levels, and yada, yada. And then they went in combination with a couple other large trials that were done. They just pulled from all the dietary data that they had. Again, this spanned 80 different countries here.
Right.
And there's different dietary surveys that are used. And so you've got the Dietary Health Index, and actually I can pull up.
Well, and then we always run into this problem with the diet studies. You can't really control
Yeah, like 245,000 people. That's hard
Yeah,
to
like-
control exactly.
You're not gonna have them be perfect for all these years on this diet, right?
So these are like recall. It's not that they follow, make sure they're sticking with these diets long term. People tend to stick to a habitual
Yes.
intervention,
Yes.
and that's what they're looking at. And when you have that many people, you actually do control for it a little bit better. When you have a few people, it's harder to control, or it's not harder to control, but you're more likely to have these what are called confounding variables influence the data.
Well, the
When you
smaller
have
ones
such a
seem to be
large
more
group,
just specific and honed in on like what exactly they need to do.
yeah, and there's a bunch of those studies, but when we look at if we want to see if there's causality associated with anything, we do have to look at these larger reviews. And those are the ones that take a bunch of the studies that, like that one with the college kids. I bring that up because it's kind of just a fun study. There's a ton of those with diet and exercise, but those don't actually tell us the answers as much as these much larger group studies do. And so when you dig into those larger studies and you pick out the research that they actually were grouping together, you will find that they are those comparison group analysis, randomized controlled trials.
Okay.
But when I'm talking about these larger studies, it's because that statistically those tell us a lot more about the
You're
data.
getting a lot more
Yep.
data. out of-
And that's why systematic reviews and meta-analyses are so much more
Systematic
important.
reviews was what it was called.
Yeah. So the diets that they use, so they use the Healthy Eating Index, the Alternative Mediterranean Diet Score, the Healthful Plant-Based Diet Index, and the Alternative Health Eating Index. And these have all been validated and shown to correlate with reduced mortality risk, and they can assess healthy diets. So they weren't all given those surveys, but those surveys were used amongst different labs, different countries and such. And so you look at these effects. I mean, the largest one being 30% reduction in mortality risk that I'm aware of in the data. And these effect sizes that we see, so the change in mortality, it sounds significant, right? I mean, reducing risk of mortality by 30%, that's huge. But it's nothing compared to exercise. So then we can segue to exercise. It's
So-
unbelievable.
I guess the way I've been looking at this, I guess in a combo type viewpoint, using both, where nutrition is important.
It is. But if you're going to spend so much time, people's problem is they spend so much time focusing on what they should and what they shouldn't eat. This is where all the aggression and debate comes in the media, on social media. You see it all over the place. If you took even a fraction of that energy and you just spent it being active, the results you would get are just a multitude greater than what you would see by focusing on your diet at all. And that's what I'm trying to tell people is like, there's so Lane Norton, he got his PhD at the University of Illinois under actually Don Layman, the protein guy that we were talking about. Lane Norton puts this in a really good way where he says like people who focus so much on nutrition, and again, this guy has a PhD studying nutritional biochemistry. I mean, if anyone knows nutrition, it's him. He says stop focusing on nutrition and focus on exercise, because what you're essentially doing, you're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. So if you're ignoring exercise, you're ignoring something that's going to have so much more of an influence on your overall health, similar to like a bank account. So you're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies if you're focusing on nutrition. I really like the way that that's worded, and I think that's so relevant. Now, when we look at exercise, so I talk about exercise and the role that has. This started way back in World War II, where this researcher looked at people on these double-decker buses in London at the time. When you compared the conductors of the bus and these guys that will walk up and down the flights of stairs, I don't know if they were like checking tickets or something, but essentially they're on their feet the whole entire time versus somebody who's just driving the bus. And they just observed, whoa, you compare these two people,
It's an interesting comparison.
It is really interesting. And a lot of people thought that. And so that's what started this like segue is they're like, wait, you compare these two people and the bus drivers were dying of cardiovascular disease so much more than the people running up and down the bus. And like, there's got to be some difference in lifestyle, right? You look into lifestyle factors, they're living in the same environment. They have the same social influences and all these other factors that they screened for didn't explain it. So then labs were like, maybe it's because they were climbing on average of like 600 flights of stairs a week, and the amount of activity they're doing could have had an influence, right? So that started this. So they had a 50% reduction in mortality. Remember, I talked about the highest we saw in diet was 30%. Now, a 50% reduction in cardiovascular risk. Sounds crazy. So other labs were like, nah, that cannot be. And so people since then have just been studying this so much. Is it activity? What the hell is going on? People who are active are living longer. Every single study you look at shows this. This is not true with diets. We just spent an entire, month and a half on this diet series where we talk about how there's this back and forth debate on, is this diet healthy? Is this not healthy? The reason that those debates exist and the reason that we did them is to showcase this exact point right here that I'm about to make. You cannot find this with exercise. You will not find the inconsistency that you find with diet because it is so clear. This is an absolute causality here. Exercise causes these health influences, and it causes this reduction in mortality. It is so consistent. And so comparing these studies, it is amazing what you find. There's a couple recent studies that have just done such an amazing job representing the importance of exercise. One came out in 2019. This was with over 100,000 people. And they looked at people who came in and did a VO2 max test. So VO2 max is the number one indicator of all-cause mortality. So I talk about these risks of death and how diet can reduce your risk of mortality. Well, what are some things you can think of that increase your risk of death?
Smoking. Eating unhealthy.
Yep. So smoking is the biggest one people often think of. I mean, this was a whole public health initiative to where people, we banned cigarettes in certain places. We know it's associated with lung cancer. Well, the risk that smoking brings to mortality is a 40% increase in risk of mortality. That's pretty huge. A 40% increase in risk. So that's like...
I know where he's going with this.
So... No, oh yeah, because I think I told you on the study because I freaking love these studies.
Smoking versus being sedentary.
Yeah, so you compare somebody's VO2 max being in the low category versus the high category of VO2 max, which is an indicator of just cardiorespiratory fitness level. You're at 4 times higher of a risk of mortality when you compare low to high VO2 max versus just 40% with smoking. So you're like, what is that? Like 8 times higher than smoking of a risk factor with a low VO2 max versus a high VO2 max. That is insane. Now, this isn't the only study that was done. There's a much larger and more recent study that evaluated the same thing with 750,000 people and showed the exact same thing. So comparing low to high VO2 max resulted in this huge effect here, being like 4 times higher mortality risk. They even looked at things like having other diseases. What is having a cancer diagnosis, having diabetes, having chronic kidney disease, having high blood pressure, all these things that we know cause you to have an increased risk of death, right? Well, you look at chronic kidney disease, 49% increase in mortality. Diabetes, 34%. Cancer, 33%. Hypertension, 14%. Low to high fitness level, like 400%. I mean, you can't, you can't make this up. Like this is represented in the data very well. And there's a dose response relationship, meaning that as you move from one category to the next, meaning as your fitness level increases, your mortality risk declines, and it doesn't stop there. That is not true with most other things in nature. There's usually like this J curve response where having too little is bad, having too much is bad. You kind of want to find this sweet spot. Well, with exercise, your fitness level does not work that way. The more fit you are, the better your health is. There is not a point of being too fit. And so it's amazing. They even expanded on this. And there's a guy in Stanford that did a side-by-side comparison. It was like, wow, exercise is probably one of the most amazing tools we have to improve health. So he looked at comparing exercise to pharmaceutical interventions on a lot of these diseases.
That'd be a good one.
And so,
Because I'm a big exercise is medicine kind of guy. So this one, I try to avoid any medications.
The most I've noticed out of exercise is mentally. It just makes you feel
more clear.
good.
Yeah.
You have a bad day at work, you just pissed off. You go to the gym,
Boom.
come back from the gym, you're like fucking dancing around.
Right.
Man.
fucking dancing around. Yeah. So the side-by-side comparison study, Stanford. This guy, this is a group of researchers.
Here, quick question before you go into that.
Yeah.
So you're saying that exercise, there's no like limit, but what if you get to a point where you like plateau? Now, are you just if you're plateaued at a certain spot, right? And you just continue to work out, but you're not lifting more weight, you're not running further, you're just at the same state. Are you going to trend upward still?
So
That's a good question.
there is theoretically, there is a max capacity that you would have on VO2. There's a max capacity you would have at strength. I mean, you're not just going to get to the point where all of a sudden you can lift up a house. There is going to be a maximum capacity for these things. However, like when you get to that plateau, you'd have to be extremely, extremely, extremely elite in all these factors to get to that point. But if you are at that point, you want to stay at that point. I
know you can push through a plateau, right?
Yeah,
But I'm asking more so, if you plateau on an exercise, but you still keep going, are you going to see that mortality rate continue to drop, or is it gonna like reach a spot where if you're not pushing yourself harder anymore, but you're just still working out, does that mortality rate also plateau?
Yeah, so based on the research here, it's looking at your fitness level with VO2 max. Now, there's also these studies with strength and muscle mass. And those are really interesting areas of research as well, showing that not just having more muscle, so having more muscle is like having less muscle increases your mortality risk by between 3 and 3.33 times. And if you have increased muscle and increased strength, then that further reduces your risk of mortality. So having low muscle and low strength do both of these things. Now, to answer your question though, if you maintain the same muscle mass, the same strength, and the same cardiorespiratory fitness, nothing's changing with your VO2 at that point. It's kind of like you have to get yourself to a certain fitness level, to a certain amount of muscle, and to a certain amount of strength to continue to see these outcomes. You have to continue to increase those metrics.
So you could continually push your mortality rate further and further, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, you can reduce your risk of dying from these diseases at any given time continuously. And that's this dose response relationship. The more fit, the stronger, and the more muscle you have, the more you'll see those reductions in mortality risk. And that's why this area of research is so amazing. Exercise has this dose response relationship. The more you have, the better it's going to be. And so this side-by-side comparison is pretty incredible. So this was done at Stanford. They took 16 meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials. So a total of 305 different randomized controlled trials, including pharmaceutical interventions and exercise interventions. Pharmaceutical interventions are pretty heavily controlled. It's not like these nutritional interventions, because you can actually doubly blind these where the researchers don't know what pill they're getting, the participants don't know what pill they're getting. It's very highly controlled, and it can very well point to the effect of the drug. And you can do a exercise versus a sedentary randomized controlled trial. You can't doubly blind them because you can't just convince someone that they're exercising if they're not. But you can still highly control it in terms of exercise intervention, no exercise intervention. And this is a lot like my PhD research. I had patients who came in that had a cancer diagnosis that were going through treatment, and I had them go through an exercise intervention that was supervised. So they came into the exercise facility to do these 3 times a week. I then had a control group where I monitored their activity level, and I could compare. So I monitored both groups. They were wearing an activity tracker, and I could see, okay, you were active and you were not. So I know activity is playing a role here, right? So these are highly controlled, randomized controlled trials. A lot of data here. And they compared the intervention of exercise versus different drugs for coronary heart disease, stroke, heart failure, and diabetes. And what they found is that exercise responded the same in some cases and even better in other cases. So there was no difference in pharmaceutical interventions for coronary heart disease, the number 1 leading cause of death, versus exercise. And the same thing is true with diabetes. So you use these pharmaceutical interventions for people that they're, trying to prevent mortality associated with these diseases. Exercise does just as well in those instances. And actually for stroke prevention, exercise performed better than pharmaceutical interventions. So not only is exercise good for your health, but it could be used as a prescription drug. You could have people not on these, I don't want to say get off your medications. That before I say that, I want to point out the fact that I am not suggesting that you go off any pharmaceutical medications. That is something you consult with your physician 100%. But it is amazing when you look at the data here and show that the impacts that it's having on health is the same, if not better, than pharmaceutical interventions. Find me any dietary intervention that has that same result. I'll wait.
What about what's it called? Like an herbalist or like a
Holistic?
Yeah, holistic medicine. That's dietary.
Yeah. Holistic medicine, though, like we don't have the clinical trial data, the human randomized controlled diet. You what?
I wonder why that is. And actually, I thought of something earlier. What about like back when we were hunter-gatherers? They were very active, but they were dying young.
So, well,
Good point.
so that's actually a funny thing that people bring up all the time with nutrition too. Yeah, it's like, well, we were made to eat this diet because back when we were hunter-gatherers, this is what we were eating.
Yeah,
It's
but
like,
I'm looking at the activity level.
Yeah.
And then in combination with a shitty diet. I guess it wasn't shitty diet, but it wasn't.
I mean, they were eating whatever they could anytime
yeah,
they
yeah.
could. They
So-
ate absolutely everything and
But they
anything
were
because food was
active.
scarce. Right.
So why were they dying at a young age?
Well, they're dying at a young age because of a lot of different factors, like especially like sanitary conditions, antibiotics, infections, and all these things that we don't die of now.
Okay.
But to go on this point though, if you look at like historically, there is data showing that what happened to our activity level after the development of, what did they term it? The introduction of powered machinery. So anything that helps you with, whether it be farming or working or anything where you're using a machine, and an estimated 50 to 70% reduction in activity level has resulted from just developing powered machinery. That's huge. People don't really talk about the change in activity level associated with obesity. Everyone's talking about this like overconsumption. These things are happening in tandem with each other. We are so much less active now. And it's kind of interesting, this area of research that studies the lack of activity. So what does a lack of activity do to your health? And you look at, there's a group of research that started back in NASA when they were doing these, different space, what do you call it? Space adventures.
I like it. Yeah, space adventures.
Well,
Let's roll
well,
with it.
the old arms race when we tried to get to the moon first. So you start to see these. There's a famous twin experiment where like one went to space, one stayed on Earth. What are you doing?
Went on a
in
space
comparison to the two?
adventure, dude.
That's where this like area of like telomere research came from, if you've heard of that. But anyway, so we start to see that like there's this impact of immobilization and what it does to your health, and you get all these poor health outcomes from being on bed rest essentially. So when you go on bed rest, even just like a few days, so there's some studies that with just 3 days of bed rest, what that does to insulin resistance, fat accumulation, triglyceride levels, like immediately all these metabolic factors get impaired. And there's some cool research on these immobilization or bed rest studies, but then having people go exercise for a period of time, trying to resemble like what we do now. A lot of people work desk jobs and then they'll go work out for an hour. And when you exercise for an hour, but you're sedentary for the remainder of the day, you're still having a lot of these negative impacts that like a sedentary or mobilized lifestyle gets. You could still improve your health, but you're hindering that ability by being sedentary. And this is really to highlight, like, it's not just going to the gym. It is simply being active. So think of it similarly as a diet of like if you're going on a diet, you're eating throughout the day. You're focusing all the time on what you're eating. You should be thinking the same way about physical activity, like getting up, walking, moving yourself as much as you can. It is not just what you're doing at the gym. The gym is just a place to go to exercise, right? But you should be exercising all the time, moving yourself all the time. But that's really like your question about the ancestors of like the activity level.
Yeah.
It's really interesting when you look back at the data, though, and see our decline in step count that we have right now in activity level. And while we're on this like historical thing, Hippocrates, this ancient Greek physician that like we say this Hippocratic oath in medical school and has like kind of like put into practice what we do in Western medicine and how we go about treating patients. The most famous physician of history who was around in like 450 BC, like this ancient Greek physician. Well, there's recorded quotes, not recorded like somebody had an audio tape, but like there are like quoted sayings that are associated with him. I'll just read a few. All parts of the body, if used in moderation and exercised in labors to which each is accustomed, become thereby healthy and well developed and age slowly. But if they are unused and left idle, they become liable to disease, defective in growth, and age quickly. Walking is a man's best friend, or man's best medicine. Dogs are man's best friend.
Whoa.
So like this has been known for all throughout history. Like even being able to associate somebody who's inactive and observe that they're at more risk of dying. Like this trend has been, we've known this.
You could go to like, I'm just going to throw Italy or, well, anywhere in Europe, really. Everybody's moving, walking places, biking places. And you can see the difference between the U.S. and European people.
See, that was my debate for Luke. Is I went to Japan and I saw one person that was overweight. They are not into weightlifting as much as America is, but I looked up their life expectancy is 4 years. Like they're 82 years and we're 78. Their nutrition's on point, but they also do walk a lot more. They don't use as many vehicles, but I don't know if you consider that much exercise, but they are moving more. Kind of to your point where the bus driver is, but they're working sedentary jobs, but they are also walking everywhere they go. They don't drive cars like we do. But that was going to be my point to kind of
they do drive cars.
Debunk your...
Just not as much.
Not as much. They really don't.
Yeah.
They really, really don't. They use trains.
Right. And I mean, like you think of what that's doing, just walking. So there's research showing just going for light activity, going for a walk, you see so many of these metabolic
Yeah.
factors. So, yeah, I would argue like if you look at their activity level and they're more active than we are, then that's also
But
that's contributing.
Their nutrition, like I went there and I felt the best I've ever felt in my life eating their food. Like I felt amazing the whole time. Like that's why I push for nutrition.
It's that MSG, dude.
It's like, dude, whatever they're serving over there, their food is amazing, and you
Yeah.
just feel good. Like
What kinds of
like
food?
even-
What kind of foods were you eating?
everything, like noodles, rice, all that kind of stuff, all their meats, everything.
Yeah. You're also on vacation at that time. You're moving around a lot more too. And like, can
That's
you
true.
even say it's just the diet, you know? Like, and I'm not trying to say that, again, I'm not trying to say diet does not have an influence here
Yeah.
because it absolutely does. But if you want to talk like how you feel specifically and
That's
want
a
to,
tough measurement.
well,
right?
I was having no wipers.
so, but you
the
can,
whole time. I was like, this is great.
yeah.
Like
no wipers.
the whole
Ghost poops is
Yeah.
what we call
Yeah, if
those.
you want to help your poops better, then nutrition is going to be the way to go.
Fiber.
Fiber.
That's why I was like, that's why I tend to go more towards the nutrition, but you're kind of swaying me the other way with all the health benefits.
Now,
Uh-oh. He's getting...
so the reason, like, you look at exercise, we can sit here and talk about all these observational studies and like why exercise is better for your health statistically, why it improves mortality outcomes better than anything that we know, any tool that we have in our toolkit as a physician. But when you look at like what actually happens, so these bouts of acute exercise, like why is VO2 max, why is muscle, why do these things contribute to improved health? Now, when we look at VO2 max specifically, so
Did we explain what VO2
right,
max
that's
is?
what I'm about to do. So the
Okay.
VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can take in and utilize at a given time. Happens to be this indicator of cardiorespiratory fitness. Now, in order to explain why that's important, let's put into perspective what that really is. Now, when you take a breath in, you're taking a breath in of oxygen. When you exhale, you're exhaling CO2. Oxygen, when it gets taken in, will travel down your lungs and will get to these alveoli, these little sections of your lungs, where it can then hop to your blood. So like it'll hop to your cardiovascular system. There's these little blood vessels called capillaries that line the walls of your alveoli. Oxygen is able to just pass right through, and then it will get delivered to your heart, where your heart just pumps it to the rest of the body. Now, if you have some sort of obstructive issue with your lungs or restrictive issue, whether it be COPD, asthma, emphysema, lung cancer, tuberculosis, anything going on with your lungs, you can't efficiently take in that air. So you, one, get less oxygen. You're going to have a lower VO2 max. Now, if you get to where your lungs are damaged or your cardiovascular system is damaged, if you're not able to efficiently pump that blood to where it's getting exchanged, so where that oxygen goes from your lungs to your blood vessels, if you have any damage to the lung there, that oxygen can't get through, that impairs VO2 max. Once it gets to your heart, if you have any issues, cardiac issues, where you can't pump blood as efficiently, things like cardiomyopathy, if you've had a previous heart attack, any condition, even if you have high blood pressure, if you can't pump blood out as efficiently, that's going to lower your VO2 max. You can't deliver that oxygen now. If your blood vessels don't respond very well, if they don't dilate and deliver blood flow where they're needed to go, when you exercise, your muscles are actually able to open up the blood vessels that deliver to it. So it can basically, without anything else, just say, hey, we're working a lot. We need more of that blood. And it'll take that blood and your blood vessels will constrict to your digestive system. This is like when you exercise, you're delivering more blood to the muscles, less to your digestive organs. If you have poor blood cardiovascular function, specifically vascularly, and you can't open those blood vessels, VO2 max is going to go down. You can't deliver as much oxygen. Now the oxygen is at the muscle. So we've gotten to the muscle at this point. Same thing as in the lungs. You've got muscle cells that are right next to the blood vessel. Oxygen goes into the muscle there. Once oxygen is in the muscle, it has to then go into the mitochondria, be used to break down all this fuel and produce energy for the muscle. If you have a metabolic condition where you can't take in, as much glucose, if you don't have as much mitochondria, which I talked about exercise improving, metabolic function is going to decrease. This this capacity of what's called oxidative phosphorylation is going to go down. You can't produce as much energy. VO2 max is going to go down. If your mitochondria don't work as well, you're going to not use that oxygen. You're going to have to break down glucose through what's called anaerobic glycolysis. You're going to be producing a ton of this lactic acid, which really is that hydrogen that's associated with lactate. pH is going to go down. You're going to fatigue quicker. VO2 max is going to go down. And this is just bringing up one metric, VO2 max. That tells us that much information. How are your lungs working? How are your blood vessels working? How is your heart working? How is your metabolism within your muscle? How is substrate utilization? How are all these processes happening? That's why it's so important. Now, exercise. One bout of exercise can increase pulmonary function. So when you increase respiratory rate, so you're breathing deeper and more efficiently, that's a stress on your lungs that your body has to adapt to. You become more efficient at taking in air, more efficient at letting that oxygen cross into the blood vessels. Now we're in the blood vessels. When you exercise, heart rate goes up. Your heart becomes more efficient at receiving blood and pumping blood. Now we can deliver that oxygen better. When you exercise, blood pressure goes up. Your body adapts by increasing vascular response. Now you're better at redirecting blood flow. You can deliver more blood to the muscles and constrict better to the digestive organ. Blood vessels improve. VO2 max goes up. Now we're at the muscle. When you exercise, 1, you get more freaking muscle. 2, you get more of that mitochondria. Now you've got more places for that oxygen to go. You've got more oxygen already. You've got more delivery of oxygen. Mitochondria goes up. You increase this metabolic function here, and you increase the ability to go through oxidative phosphorylation. Again, I'm only talking about VO2 max and what exercise does here. No diet intervention that exists is going to improve pulmonary function, improve cardiovascular function, improve metabolic function like that. That ain't going to happen. I'm only talking about a few systems. I can keep going on what does it do to immune function? What does it do to cognitive function? When you do endurance exercise, you increase what's called brain-derived neurotropic factor. It's the signal to the brain to improve what's called neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to adapt. This happens right on this area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is in charge of memory recall, things that get deteriorated with Alzheimer's disease. You also get this increase in vascular function in the brain, not just the rest of your body. When you get dementia-associated diseases, vascular function declines. That causes the brain to actually atrophy. So you lose brain volume just like you do muscle. You know what preserves that? Exercise. And immune function. When you exercise, again, one bout of exercise, you mobilize immune cells. So you're actually increasing immune function by going to one bout of exercise. Think of what it does over time. One bout of exercise is also reducing all these baseline inflammatory markers. You get a reduction in resting heart rate because your heart is so strong at this point. Doesn't even have to work hard to do all this stuff. You get a reduction in blood pressure. You get a reduction in glucose levels. Insulin resistance goes down. Cognitive function improves. Overall mood improves. You get a release of these catecholamines that we talked about, norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine. One bout of exercise increases all these things. That's why you feel so freaking awesome after you exercise one time. Think of what that does over the long term.
Just like Arnold said.
Yeah.
I'm coming in everywhere. Coming in the gym.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And even the gut. You look at people who exercise versus don't exercise, the gut microbiome is influenced there. Our gut influences so much of the rest of our health. Even just exercising influences that. I mean, a bad diet can hurt you more than a good diet can help you, is really the underlying thing here. And somebody who is metabolically healthy, somebody who is fit, is not going to benefit from going on a diet like somebody who is not healthy. Diet is a great intervention for somebody who has poor metabolic health and you want to try to get them back to a healthy state. But if you're metabolically healthy, going on a diet is not going to have the health implications that exercise will. Don't let yourself get to that poor metabolic health is really the thing. I mean, there's this amazing area of research on this coronary artery disease. And there's a cool editorial that came out of the Mayo Clinic where they looked at all this research showing that when they had patients come in with coronary artery disease, normally you're going to go through all these imaging studies to diagnose and, come up with this plan of testing and interventions. It costs so much money for the patient. Well, when they had them just do exercise up to 10 METs, so if you can achieve 10 METs, which I don't want to dive into a metabolic equivalent. Essentially, like when we're sitting here, we're at 1 MET. It's a metabolic equivalent of rest is 1 MET. As you increase how hard you're working, you're going to get to, or you're going to increase METs. A level of 10 METs is like carrying 25 pounds up a staircase, playing full court basketball, singles tennis. It's been compared to those things. That's your level of like 10 METs. If you can achieve that level, you're at such a low risk of cardiovascular issues, even if you, or like you're at such a risk of dying of a heart attack with coronary artery disease, that they're starting to say, we should just measure somebody's fitness level instead of do all these imaging tests. So it would avoid all these unnecessary procedures and images. So if you went in and you had all these high cardiovascular risks, your physician or cardiologist should be like, well, let's just test your fitness level. Because if you're fit, I don't even have to do these
Play
imaging.
a full court basketball game. Let's see what you got.
Exactly. And it's like, it's really cool. I'm curious to see, because again, this came out of the Mayo Clinic, and I'm curious to see how much traction this gets. And like, if we utilized exercise as a vital sign, like when a patient comes in, if I can just see how fit they are, and if they're fit, I'm not doing anything. I'm not checking your A1C levels, and I don't need you to. You don't have to spend all that money
watching them play like a full court basketball game.
So you would have an exercise physiologist run through either a submax or a max VO2 assessment.
Oh, okay,
so that would be part of your physical exam. Okay. Come in and test your fitness level. It's like, well, I'm not putting you on any medications here. You're fit. And that would, all the patients, everyone would be living longer. We would spend less money. The burden of healthcare would be just totally decreased.
Go do a VO2 max test.
But no, there's not a lot of money in prescribing exercise. So.
Is there like easy ways to like schedule that? Can you just be like, hey, I want a VO2 max test? Can you just go to your doctor and they can schedule that with someone, or like?
Sure, yeah, you totally can. But the problem is insurance isn't going to cover it.
Oh, okay.
Unless you have.
Do you know how much that would run a person without insurance?
I think they're like $150 for an assessment. At least that's what they were when we were down in Mankato, running these all the time. I haven't paid for one in a while.
Yeah, because you always do studies. But yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Literally, the most useful thing you can do is get in good shape, get muscle, get strong,
do some HIIT training,
get in shape. All right. So with any other questions about all this stuff?
So like the sedentary, like people can't get away from being at their desk. They have to do their job. So would just doing a standing desk kind of eliminate that, or do they have to be moving? Do they need to get one of those like treadmills?
Again, I think this is a good discussion for like how to go about exercise and stuff.
Yeah.
Standing desk, standing up, moving as much as you possibly can really is the underlying thing. I mean, people use those stability balls and sit on those so you can activate your core during it.
That's better than just sitting in a chair. That's
totally.
Okay.
Yep.
Or having ADD and just twitching.
Yeah, just keep shaking.
That's
your leg
cool.
all day.
There's like that recent study I shared on the social media page of like they looked at people who just are shaking, like the shaking your knees as you're
doing a little
working,
leg bump.
If you're fidgeting essentially.
Yeah.
And like there's this huge increase in resting energy expenditure, metabolic rate, which actually it wouldn't be resting energy expenditure. It's what you call NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, where you're like not focusing on the movement. It's pretty crazy.
So when Amy tells me to stop shaking my leg, I'm like, hey, it's for my health.
Yeah, you're gonna live longer. Yeah, literally.
Yeah. No, I don't really have any other questions. But
did he sway you?
He swayed me in I mean, yeah.
Are you on the exercise train?
Well, I've always been.
If you had to choose two,
you have to
pick
one.
You have to pick which one's better. If you told somebody, if you had to choose right now,
me
diet or exercise,
I'd have to go. I mean, I'd have to go exercise. And you convinced me I got to work out harder.
Yeah, the HIIT training. Yeah,
because I don't think I'm reaching my full potential.
What are you gonna pick, Reed?
I started out with the nutrition because I've always been 80% nutrition, 20% exercise, and like I was gonna pick that 80% because I mean, when I went to Japan, like everybody's eating healthy. They're not working out. Nobody was ripped or looked like
Yeah, but they're moving.
but they are moving. But when at work, they are sedentary.
The
They
funny
just sit
thing
there.
about that,
and then when they get
though-
home, they just sit there.
Yeah,
But they to and from work.
to
or
and
going
from
to
work.
the store.
But even still, like if you don't think about just taking a walk as being really all that beneficial, you don't think about that. You're thinking, gotta go to the gym for me to see really results. But
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on the
walking
exercise
uphill.
train. He convinced me. I definitely thought I was gonna.
I mean, technically,
Hold-
I'm on
hold
both.
my ground.
But if I have to
No,
choose,
you got to choose.
gotta choose
We're
one.
all on both.
We're all on both.
Yeah. Well, that's the key. You
All
gotta,
in on exercise. I'll
both
eat Taco Bell.
both is key. But exercise is
For the sake of debate,
Yeah.
more important
exercise is more important.
Yeah.
And
for your overall health.
yeah.
And if Dr. Luke didn't convince you, let us know. Reach out on our social
Oh,
media.
we keep
Just-
going all day.
Yeah. Let us know if he didn't convince you, and I'm sure Dr. Luke can do it.
Oh, we'll keep going with exercise stuff. Don't you worry. You'll get there.
You'll get there.
All right. I'll miss you guys.
I'll miss you guys too.
I'll miss you guys.
Oh, I was gonna say, don't do that.